There's a moment you don't forget. Not because it was loud, not because anyone screamed or threw something across the room. You don't forget it because it was quiet, because the person on the other end of the phone paused just a half second too long before answering, and in that half second you already knew. I called my son on a Tuesday morning. I remember because I had just come in from walking the dog, my old beagle, Chester, and I was still pulling off my jacket when I picked up my phone and dialed. It was late September. The air had finally started to cool down after a brutal Georgia summer, and I was in a decent mood for the first time in weeks. My son's name is Ryan. He was 36 at the time. Married to a woman named Cassandra, Cassie. Everyone called her, for about 4 years. They had taken over a struggling auto detailing shop in Marietta about 2.5 years earlier, and I had helped them do it. Helped them the way a father helps. Which is to say, I helped them with everything. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounded a little flat. I didn't think much of it. "Hey, buddy, just checking in. I saw the sign went up last week. Looks good. You set a date yet for the grand reopening?" They had been renovating. New signage, new equipment, new bay doors, the whole thing. The plan was to relaunch under a new name. Make a real event out of it. Ryan had talked about it for months, said they were going to do it right. Ribbon cutting, local press, maybe even a food truck out front. He'd mentioned it was coming up soon. There was a pause. Not a long one. Maybe 2 seconds. But I've been a father for 36 years, and I know my son's pauses. "Oh," he said. "Yeah, we actually did it Saturday." I stood in my kitchen holding my jacket in one hand and my phone in the other. Chester was sitting at my feet waiting for his treat. "Saturday," I said. Yeah, I was pretty low-key. Just, close friends and a few business contacts. Cassie wanted to keep it small. I didn't say anything for a moment. "I didn't know about it," I finally said. "I know, Dad, I'm sorry. It came together fast, and Cassie thought it would be better to keep the guest list tight. You know how she gets about that stuff." I did know. I knew exactly how she got about that stuff. I told him it was fine. I told him I understood. I hung up the phone, set it on the counter, and stood there in my kitchen for a long time while Chester looked up at me with his big dumb eyes like he was waiting for an explanation too. I was 62 years old, and my son had just told me I wasn't invited to the reopening of the business I had largely paid for. Let me back up. My name is Paul. I spent 31 years working as a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm outside Atlanta. Not glamorous work, but steady. I was good at it. I retired at 60 with a decent pension, a paid-off house, and enough in savings to live comfortably without touching my 401k for another few years if I was careful. My wife, Karen, passed away from ovarian cancer 7 years before all this. Ryan was 29 when she died. It hit him hard. It hit both of us hard. We got closer for a while, the way you do when you're the only two people left who knew her the way you knew her. We talked more. I drove up to see him more. We had a standing Sunday phone call for about a year. Then he met Cassandra. I want to be careful here, because I'm not trying to paint her as a villain from the start. When Ryan first introduced her, I tried. I genuinely tried. She was attractive, confident, sharp. She had opinions about everything and wasn't shy about sharing them. Ryan seemed lit up around her in a way I hadn't seen in years. The Sunday calls tapered off. I told myself that was normal. People fall in love. Priorities shift. I wasn't going to be the father who pouted about losing his son's attention to a woman. The first time I noticed something was off was at Thanksgiving, about 8 months after they started dating. Cassandra made a comment at the table. Something about how Ryan had finally stopped letting guilt keep him attached, and then looked at me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ryan laughed a little, uncomfortable. I let it go. They got engaged 14 months later. I found out in a group text, not a phone call, a group text, with a photo of the ring. I stared at it for a while. Then I texted back, "Congratulations, so happy for you both," with a heart emoji. Because what else do you do? The wedding was 18 months after that. Small ceremony, they said. intimate, which I understood until I arrived and counted 47 guests, none of whom were from my side of the family except me. My sister wasn't invited. My brother wasn't invited. My two closest friends from Karen's memorial, people who had known Ryan since he was in middle school, were not invited. Cassandra's entire extended family was there. Her college friends, her co-workers, her book club. I sat in the third row and watched my son get married and smiled the whole time. I gave a toast that made people laugh. I danced with Cassandra's mother. I wrote a check for $10,000 and put it in an envelope with a card. On the drive home, I pulled over twice because I couldn't see the road clearly. 6 months after the wedding, Ryan called me with an idea. He and Cassandra had been looking at a business opportunity. There was an auto detailing shop in Marietta that had been struggling since the owner retired and left it to his nephew, who had no idea what he was doing. The equipment was outdated but functional. The location was excellent, and the lease was reasonable. Ryan had spent years working in automotive, first as a mechanic, then managing a service department, and he genuinely knew the business. He wanted to buy the shop, renovate it, and turn it into something real. The problem was capital. He needed $60,000 to cover the purchase of the business, the first 6 months of lease and overhead, and basic renovations. He had $18,000 saved. Cassandra had $12,000. They were $30,000 short, and the bank had offered them a loan with terms that would have choked the business before it got started. Ryan asked if I would consider bridging the gap. I want to say I thought about it carefully. I want to say I asked hard questions and consulted a financial advisor and drew up paperwork. The truth is I said yes within about 48 hours of him asking, because he was my son, because his mother would have said yes, because I had the money and he needed it, and that felt like the only math that mattered. I transferred $30,000 to their joint account on a Friday morning. We had a conversation, not a written agreement, just a conversation, where Ryan said he would pay me back as the business became profitable. No timeline, no interest, no pressure. Those were my words. I told him I didn't need it back on any schedule. I just wanted him to succeed. Cassandra was on the call. She thanked me warmly. She said, "You're going to be so glad you did this, Paul. We're going to make you proud." I believed her. Over the next 2 years, I was involved in ways I hadn't entirely anticipated, not in a controlling way, or at least I didn't think so at the time. I helped them find a contractor for the renovation. I spent 3 weekends in Marietta helping with the build-out, running to Home Depot, painting walls, assembling equipment. I knew people in commercial real estate who helped them negotiate better terms on a storage unit they needed. When their first commercial-grade pressure washer broke down 6 months in, I covered the repair bill because it came at a bad time, and Ryan called me in a panic. The repair bill was $1,400. I didn't add it to what he owed me. I didn't even mention it. A few months after that, Cassandra called, not Ryan, Cassandra, and said they had an opportunity to add a ceramic coating service, which would significantly increase their revenue per vehicle. The equipment and training would cost around $8,000. Could I help? I helped. Then there was a slow quarter, and they needed to cover payroll. $4,000. Then, a marketing push Cassandra had designed, a new website, some local advertising, branded uniforms, $6,000, which she said was an investment in the brand. I wrote the checks. I transferred the funds. I told myself this was what it looked like to support someone building something real. In total, over 26 months, I gave them just over $58,000. I'm not saying this to establish a ledger. I'm saying it because it matters for what happened next. The renovation finished in August. The new signage went up in early September. I drove by it on a Sunday on my way back from visiting a friend. I didn't stop, I just slowed down and looked at it from the road. It looked good. Clean lines, new paint, professional. I felt proud. Genuinely proud. 3 weeks later, Ryan told me the grand reopening had been on Saturday and they'd kept it small. I'm going to tell you something about what that felt like, and I want to be honest about it. It didn't feel like anger right away. It felt like something colder than anger, like when you reach for something that's always been in the same place and your hand finds empty air. A kind of quiet disorientation, like the world shifted 2 inches to the left while you weren't looking, and nothing is quite where it's supposed to be. I had helped build that place. Literally, I had a scar on my left thumb from a table saw incident during the renovation. I had $58,000 tied up in those walls. And on the day they celebrated what we'd all worked toward, I was at home watching football. I didn't call Ryan back that week. I needed a little time to figure out what I was actually feeling before I opened my mouth. On Thursday, Cassandra called me. She didn't call to apologize or explain the reopening. She called because a piece of equipment, a high-speed buffer they'd purchased in the spring, had been damaged by an employee, and the replacement cost was $2,200. She wanted to know if I could cover it. I sat with the phone against my ear and listened to her explain the situation with the same bright, practical efficiency she always used when she needed something. No mention of the Saturday reopening. No acknowledgement that I hadn't been there, just the number and the ask. "Cassandra," I said, "I wasn't at the reopening." A pause. "I know. I'm sorry about that, Paul. It really was just a small thing. Ryan wanted to keep it." "I painted that building," I said. "I installed the drainage in the third bay. I've given you and Ryan $58,000. I know that, and we are so grateful. I'm not asking for gratitude. I'm asking why I wasn't there." Another pause, longer this time. "It was Cassie's vision for the launch," she said, and I noticed for the first time that she'd referred to herself in the third person. She wanted the energy to be right. The guests to be curated. I didn't say anything. "I know it's not ideal," she continued. "But you'll come by the shop. We'll do something. You and Ryan can do a whole tour. He'd love that." I told her I'd think about the equipment and I'd call her back. I didn't call her back. I didn't call Ryan either, not right away. I spent the next few days doing something I should have done 2 years earlier. I sat down with all my bank statements, and I added up every dollar I'd transferred to them, every check I'd written, every repair I'd covered. It took me most of an afternoon. $58,400. I wrote the number down on the piece of paper and looked at it for a while. Then I called my accountant, a man named Dennis who I'd worked with for nearly 15 years. I told him the situation. I asked what my options were from a documentation standpoint, given that I'd never drawn up a formal loan agreement. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Paul, tell me everything." I told him everything. Dennis was not unkind, but he was direct. He said that without a written agreement, recovery would be difficult. He said that if Ryan and Cassandra chose to characterize my contributions as gifts, a court might agree. He said I should consult an attorney. I consulted an attorney. Her name was Patricia, and she'd been doing family and civil law for 20 years. She listened carefully, asked a lot of questions, and then said something that stuck with me. She said, "The question isn't just what you can prove, it's what you want this relationship to look like going forward." I told her I didn't know anymore. She said that was honest, at least. I sent Ryan a letter. Not a text, not an email. A letter, written by hand, 2.5 pages. I told him I loved him. I told him I had supported him not because I expected anything in return, but because that's what I believed a father did. I told him the reopening had hurt me deeply, and not just because I wasn't there, but because no one had thought to tell me beforehand. No one had apologized afterward, and the next call I received was about money. I told him I wasn't transferring any more funds. I told him if he wanted to talk, I was here. He called me 4 days later. Cassandra was on the call. It did not go the way I'd hoped. Ryan started by saying he understood I was upset, but that I had to understand how much pressure they were under, and that the reopening decision wasn't personal. Cassandra's voice came in almost immediately, sharper now, saying that they had given me every opportunity to be involved, and that I had chosen to make this financial instead of just being supportive. I said I had been financial to the tune of $58,000. She said that money was given freely and with no strings attached, and that trying to attach strings after the fact was manipulative. I remember the word landed strange. Manipulative. I'd written a check for $30,000, painted their walls, driven to Marietta on weekends, and somehow the manipulation was mine. Ryan said he thought we needed to take some space. I told him I agreed. The space lasted 11 days. On the 12th day, I received a certified letter from an attorney I'd never heard of. The letter stated that Ryan and Cassandra believed I had made a verbal commitment to continue supporting the business through its second full year of operation, that my withdrawal of support constituted a breach of that commitment, and that they were seeking damages in the amount of $41,000 for anticipated funding I had allegedly promised to provide. I sat at my kitchen table and read the letter 3 times. Chester was at my feet. I reached down and scratched his ears. He put his chin on my knee. I called Patricia. She told me not to panic. She said the claim was aggressive and that a verbal promise of ongoing support, especially one disputed by both parties, was extremely difficult to prove. She said we had a strong defense. She also said we should start pulling together everything I had: bank records, text messages, any emails, any communication that showed the nature of our arrangement. I had kept everything. I'm an organized person by habit. 31 years in construction project management will do that to you. I had every bank transfer statement, every text exchange where money was discussed, the call recordings from my voicemail where Ryan had called and said things like, "I don't know what we'd do without you, Dad, and I promise we'll make this right. I swear to God." I had a text from Cassandra from 14 months earlier that said, and I am quoting directly, "You have been so generous, and we never want you to feel obligated. This is your gift to us, and we will always be grateful. No pressure, ever. No pressure, ever. No pressure, ever." Patricia read that text and said quietly, "Good." The filing process took about 6 weeks. In that time, Ryan did not call me. Cassandra sent one email, brief, professional, addressed to both me and Patricia, that was clearly drafted by their attorney. I did not respond. My brother called me when he found out what was happening. He was furious on my behalf. My sister called and cried. A few of my friends from the old neighborhood, people who'd known Ryan when he was a kid, asked if there was anything they could do. I told everyone the same thing: let the process work. The hearing was on a Wednesday in February. It was cold, one of those gray Atlanta February days that feels like the city can't decide whether winter is over. I wore a dark gray suit that I'd last worn to Karen's memorial. I don't know why I chose that one. Maybe I just wanted to feel like she was there. Patricia had prepared me thoroughly. She told me to answer clearly and briefly, not to volunteer information, not to show anger. Ryan and Cassandra were already seated when I came in. Ryan looked thin. He didn't look at me when I sat down. Cassandra looked at me once, quickly assessing, and then looked away. Their attorney was a young man who was, I could tell, very good at his job. He was organized and confident, and he had clearly rehearsed. He argued that the pattern of financial support over 26 months, combined with verbal discussions about the business's long-term needs, established an implied commitment on my part. Patricia was better. She walked through every transfer, every date, every amount. She introduced the text from Cassandra about no pressure, ever. She played a voicemail, with the judge's permission, in which Ryan had specifically said, in his own voice, that he would never hold me to anything, and that anything I gave was out of love, no strings. Then, she asked me to speak. I had not planned to say much. Patricia had coached me to keep it short. But when I sat in that chair and the judge looked at me and asked me to describe the nature of my financial relationship with the defendants, something shifted. I talked for about 12 minutes. I talked about the original $30,000. I talked about the weekends in Marietta. I talked about the scar on my thumb. I talked about the broken pressure washer and the payroll and the marketing campaign. I talked about getting the group text when my son got engaged and sitting in the 3rd row at his wedding while my sister stayed home. I talked about driving past the new signage on a Sunday and feeling proud, genuinely proud. And I talked about finding out the reopening was on Saturday, and the next call I got was about a broken buffer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look at Ryan. I just talked. When I finished, the courtroom was very quiet. The judge dismissed their claim. He found no evidence of an implied contractual obligation, and noted that the documentation strongly supported my characterization of the funds as voluntary gifts made without conditions. He did not award me damages, which Patricia had told me was unlikely, but he dismissed their case in full. I walked out of the courthouse into the gray February morning and stood on the steps for a minute. My brother was waiting at the bottom. He hugged me, and I let him. And we stood like that for a moment. I went home. I changed out of Karen's suit. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table while Chester slept in a patch of sunlight on the floor. I want to be clear about something, because I think it matters. I did not feel victorious. I felt tired, hollowed out in a way that I don't think I'd expected. When you spend 36 years loving someone, when you hold them in the hospital the day they arrive and teach them to ride a bike and sit with them while they cry over their mother's casket, you don't get to feel triumphant when a court vindicates you against them. There is no version of that which feels like winning. What I felt, mostly, was like I had finally stopped pretending. For years, I had been excusing things. The group text, the wedding guest list, the way my name wasn't mentioned in the speech Ryan gave at the opening, the 100 small, sideways looks from Cassandra that told me exactly where I ranked in that household. I'd been writing checks and telling myself that money was love in a language that was somehow getting through, even when everything else suggested it wasn't. The reopening was just the moment I ran out of pretending. Ryan has not called me since the hearing. That was 14 months ago as I write this. I have called him twice. Short calls. I told him I loved him. I told him there was no version of the future where I stopped loving him. I told him I was here when he was ready. He was polite, distant. The calls lasted about 4 minutes each. I don't know what's happening in his marriage. I don't know what she tells him about me. I don't know if he believes it. He is my son, and I hope, sincerely, that he is happy. I hope the shop is doing well. I hope he has people around him who love him without keeping score. I walk Chester every morning. I have coffee with my brother on Sundays. I started volunteering with a construction nonprofit that builds affordable housing. 2 Saturdays a month, mostly framing and drywall, nothing complicated. I come home tired in a way that feels useful. On the first warm day last April, I drove out to the cemetery and sat by Karen's stone for a while. I didn't have much to say. I told her what had happened, the short version, and I told her I was okay. I told her I was still figuring out what okay looked like exactly, but I was working on it. I also told her that Chester had eaten an entire roast chicken off the counter the previous week, and seemed deeply proud of himself, and I thought she'd want to know that. I sat there for a long time. The sun was coming through the trees in long, early spring angles. It was a beautiful day. I am 63 now. I sleep well. I have enough. There's a version of this story where I end by telling you what I learned, or what you should take from it. Some tidy moral to wrap it up. I'm not going to do that. Life isn't a lesson. It's just what happens. What I will say is this. The moment I stopped waiting for my son to make me feel like I had mattered, the moment I just accepted that I had mattered, that I knew I had, that no verdict and no invitation and no return phone call was going to change the plain fact of what I had given. That was the moment I started to feel like myself again. I don't know if Ryan will come back. I hope he does. I'll be here if he does. But I stopped holding my breath, and that, more than anything, is what finally let me breathe. I've thought a lot about what it actually costs to ignore what you already know. Not money. I mean the other kind of cost. The one that compounds quietly over years while you're busy telling yourself a more comfortable story. I knew something was wrong when I got that group text about the engagement. I knew it at the wedding, sitting 3 rows back while my sister stayed home. I knew it every time Cassandra called me. Not Ryan, always Cassandra. And the only subject was a number she needed. I knew it in the pause before my son told me they'd celebrated without me. I knew. I just kept choosing not to act on what I knew. That's the part I've had to sit with. Not what Ryan did, not what Cassandra did, but what I allowed to continue because I confused endurance with love. I told myself that a good father absorbs. That generosity means not keeping score. That if I just kept showing up with my checkbook and my paint roller and my willingness to be useful, something would eventually shift. It didn't shift. It just got more expensive. There's a kind of intelligence that has nothing to do with being book smart or professionally accomplished. It's the intelligence of paying attention to what's actually in front of you instead of what you wish were there. Ryan and Cassandra showed me repeatedly and clearly how they valued my presence. I chose to read those signals as temporary, as stress, as Cassandra's personality, as anything except what they plainly were. Wisdom isn't something that arrives when you're young and idealistic. It tends to show up after you've made the expensive mistakes, after you've transferred the 30,000 and the 8,000 and the 4,000 and sat in the third row and smiled to the toast. It shows up when you finally sit down with a bank statement and a quiet house and stop pretending the numbers say something other than what they say. What I know now, and I mean really know it, in the way you only know things that cost you something, is that self-respect isn't selfishness. Stopping is not the same as abandoning. When I'd told Ryan I wouldn't be sending any more money, I wasn't punishing him. I was finally being honest with both of us. I was saying, this is what I will do, and this is what I won't, and those two things are mine to decide. The character I built over 60-some years, the reliability, the follow-through, the willingness to work, those things served me. They also made me easy to take advantage of, because I'd convinced myself that a man who keeps his word always has to keep giving. He doesn't. Keeping your word means doing what you said you'd do. It doesn't mean funding a situation that is slowly making you invisible. Cassandra called what I did manipulative. I've turned that word over many times. What I've landed on is this. The person with the most integrity in any relationship is usually the one who gets accused of bad motives when they finally stop complying. That tells you something. I don't know what Ryan believes about me now. I hope, someday, he'll be able to look at what happened with clear eyes. I hope he gets there. I'll be here. But I'm not waiting anymore, and the difference between waiting and being available. That distinction, small as it sounds, is what let me start living the rest of my life instead of just managing the wreckage of the last chapter. Chester is asleep at my feet as I write this. The sun is coming through the kitchen window. It's a good morning. I made myself that. One decision at a time. Nobody gave it to me. That part, at least, is all mine.